From CRI Simple Numbers, this is Profitability Playbook, the Simple Numbers Podcast, a podcast for those championing market growth and anchoring the nation's economy, small businesses, and entrepreneurs.
Hey there, I'm Mike Maxon, that's Brandon Gray, and welcome to another episode of the Simple Numbers Profitability Playbook Podcast. Brandon is fresh off vacation, so he should be ready to just rock and roll, man.
I'm ready to roll, recharged. Went down to the beach for a little while, and it was hot, but had a great trip. So good.
You took
good time.
Some good seafood.
Ate some good seafood. That's the highlight of the trip. I go for the food.
Yep. Yeah. I'm one of them snobs where it's like I gotta be near the water to get seafood. Like everyone we're at, we're in Huntsville, Alabama. I'm not saying I won't try a bite of someone's seafood. I'm just saying I'm not ordering it because I want to see a body of water and know there's a high probability that they caught it out of there.
Exactly.
And it's on my plate.
No doubt.
Makes it much better. And there's been, when I lived down there, when I was in the Army and I was in EOD school, we used to go down to a couple of restaurants down there. You charter the boat, go out, you catch it, and they come back and cook it.
Man, yeah.
Yeah, that was some good stuff. Well, anyway, so today we're going to talk about something that I gave a presentation to a business group the other day, and it was good because the way I just viewed financials, they had not been really integrated into simple numbers or anything. And so I had a lot of talk around gross margin. And so gross margin, profit to gross margin, getting your gross margin right, labor efficiency, labor dollar per gross margin dollar. Those were all things that were just an interesting topic to this group that they had never really been, exposed to. And so today I did want to focus a lot on gross margin. Business 101, everything happens at the margin. I know that seems very simple. However, when you're running millions of dollars through multiple products and services, you got labor, you got subs, you got all this stuff. What is it here that does that? And the true top line of any business is your gross margin. That's the first dollar you get to spend internally. And, you're going to have to buy your labor with it. And so getting that number right and understanding what that comprises of. So Brandon, give me the rundown, man.
Yeah. So let's start, since not everybody who listens to the podcast may be familiar with how we define gross margin. We'll start with that. Then we'll kind of talk about some techniques and some things we can do as we analyze it and look to improve it. So we're going to define gross margin a little bit differently than the accounting textbook would say. The biggest difference is that we do not include labor in calculating gross margin. So simply put, it's going to be revenue less all of your non-labor direct costs. And those could come in the form, it could be supplies, could be materials, could be product costs. For service-based businesses, there may be no direct cost other than labor. So your revenue and your gross margin would be the same in that instance. But for everyone else, there's going to be direct costs. So if production or performance delivery of a product or service goes away, do those costs go away with it? So that's kind of the first thing. And once you've identified that, then as you mentioned, we have what we call the real revenue or the true revenue of the business. There's several clients that we work with. We don't even look at revenue. We only look at gross margin because that's really all that matters. Now, you want to find ways to make that margin as efficient as possible. But just like you said, at the end of the day, that's all I have to spend. So, revenue is vanity. And two, if you look at it under this kind of format, it allows you to compare and look at different businesses at the same level. So if you've got a lot of direct costs and you're kind of looking and talking to another business that doesn't, you talk gross margin dollars, now you're the same in terms of what you're actually able to work with to pay your direct labor and pay your overhead. So that's kind of the starting point. You got to start there. Determining gross margin, once again, is going to be revenue less the non-labor direct cost. From there, you then can start the analysis. And so one thing that we're starting to see happen is what we would call margin shrink. So, or compression of margin. In years past, when we saw that happen, the very first thing we would go to and start discussing would be pricing. Well, that's still there. Still need to look at it. Still need to talk about it. But I would dare to say that for most companies out there, increasing pricing is an extremely difficult pursuit. Now, doesn't mean you don't look at it. Like I said, we want to examine it and what have you. You may be under the assumption that you can't increase prices. Well, that may be partially true. With your current service or product offering as it exists today, you may not be able to increase pricing. So the first thing starts to become, okay, what do I need to change in order to be able to deliver more value and warrant a price increase? And there's a lot of things that you can do there. For those who have products, I think retail, for example, one of the techniques we really like is packaging. And we came across this years ago with a client of ours that was an online paintball supply company. So they sold paintball guns and paintballs and everything that went on the guns and, you know, the masks and the goggles and all that kind of stuff. And what we would find is that since they were online, it was very easy to price compare in the shop. But if you packaged a group of products together, it became much more difficult. And most people wouldn't take the time to try to break out 6 or 7 items that were in a package, compare the price of all of that to other pricing. And so they would have, you know, hey, I'm looking to get into paintball. Want to buy a gift for someone. I don't know all the details. Well, hey, here's the starter kit. It's got everything you need in it to get going. And that allowed them to kind of massage pricing because it was presented a little bit differently. Mike, you might have some comments, especially on the service side of the house, on things you can do to kind of increase the value there.
Yeah, it's the same thing, but obviously with services, in addition to new services. So I'll give the low-hanging fruit of one of the businesses I enjoy working with for IT companies, mainly because there is so much tech out there. And you have a business where, hey, I'm providing managed services for businesses in their IT world. But guess what? You know, it's starting to become a little bit of commodity. They're facing lots of competition. But guess what? We add cybersecurity now. Guess what? We add more of a outsourced CTO type role to the business. Maybe not as much revenue, but higher margin revenue in terms of being able to consult on technology with them. So the ability on the service side to add in different services and different wrinkles to your current service package could potentially be there. And here's another one, and this will surprise you, Brandon, that I'm going this route. But I was on a call with a guy, and they just happened to be an IT company, and we were talking about margin because they were facing some margin shrink. And you know what he said? He said this, and he goes, you know, we might be doing too much for the client.
Right.
And here, their package of services was it. The clients maybe not have cared about 20% of them. And so again, back to that whole thinking about margin. And so Brandon, I know the answer to the question, but I'll let you answer it. What can businesses do to see if they're running into any margin creep? Because you might see it overall, but for a lot of businesses, they have other stuff going on. It might not be just a one show business. What can they do to see if they got any margin shrinkage?
So you've got to be able to track your margin by product or service offering. So that's kind of the starting point. I'll use an example of the client that we work with now. They're in wholesale for products, and they started looking at the margin by product. And what they started to realize was that their most profitable products were not the products that they were emphasizing and selling the most of. They're actually selling a lot of the low margin products. Well, you know, I don't get too caught up in margin percentage, looking at it as a percentage of revenue, although that can be an indicator at the end, because you can't spend a percentage, you can only spend $1. So at the end of the day, I got to find a way to generate more dollars. And so in their case, they kind of went back and looked at the different products that they're offering and kind of said, hey, some of these we just don't need to do. In the service industry, so simple numbers, patient 1.0, was a landscaping company that we worked with. And when I say they weren't the very first client we were worked with, but they were under the current kind of simple numbers philosophy and what we look at in the process that we use. And they had an irrigation division. And so we started looking at margin with the irrigation. We actually took it a step further. We looked at contribution margins. So for those of you that are not familiar with simple numbers, contribution margins are a unique term to simple numbers, to where we look at the gross margin minus the labor cost. So that gets you, kind of all in what it's producing to pay the overhead. And it was a high, and back to this client example, it was a high revenue item, but the margin on it and the contribution margin was just terrible. So they walked away from a 6, almost 7-figure business line and redeployed those the assets, the team, to a more profitable division of the business.
And that's an excellent point there. So I had this conversation with someone the other day. I said, it's margin dollars are important. That's why sometimes an extremely high volume client that generates a lot of margin dollars, though the margin percentage might be low. Now, where you start getting off the rails is that low margin taking a significant amount of effort.
Right.
And that is where you end up running into that problem. And so while you're looking at that, and let's say I'm a $5 million business, I get a contract offer for $1 million, but really it's 250,000 and 750 of it's going to be pass through. But man, that's 250K of margin dollars. Problem is, I got to deploy a significant amount of resources to then service that 250. And so remember, 700, that $1 million is still $1 million activity. So there is a chance it could be that. And back to the IT company example, they resell product. It is extremely low margin. Right. They might mark it up 10, 15, 20%.
On hardware, yeah.
On hardware, yeah. But it takes no effort. It's literally like, hey, I'm going to order you some computers, mark it up, sell. And because of they're doing the work instead of the client is fine with that markup because that's that extra time they're taking. But really, in the grand scheme of things, it's very little effort. There isn't a bunch of resources deployed, nothing. And so think about that too when you look at it.
I'll give you another example. So a software client that we have, as part of they were fixed price. So you purchase the software, and it was an annual license, X amount for the annual license. Included in that was training. And so they got to looking at what are we producing in terms of, in their case, contribution margin, because it was labor related. What are we producing in training? And what they found out is they were spending much more resources and time in training than what they had actually anticipated. And this had went on for several years, and they had not caught it until they started breaking it down by the different line items of revenue that they were generating. And so they changed the process up to basically say, hey, you're going to get X amount of training hours or X amount of training time, meaning from the time you buy it until an end date. And then after that, you have to purchase a block of training. And I think it was actually a model that they had adopted from one of the CRM subscriptions that they had, to where they needed some more training. They went back to them and they said, hey, you got to buy more training. And so nonetheless, they changed that up to where, okay, yeah, you're still getting the value, but we're putting some boundaries around it so that, hey, as you cross over one of those boundaries, all right, kind of like the old cell phone minutes plan, you got to buy more minutes as far as that goes. So yeah, I'd say your starting point is you really need to understand at a granular level what you're producing in margin by the different products and services that you're offering. Because without that data, you're just guessing. You're
One area where we're running into helping clients understand the margin side of things is subcontractors. And what Brandon, when he was explaining to you the simple numbers P&L of revenue less non-labor COGS gets you your gross margin, we do include in the non-labor COGS the use of subcontractors at temporary use. There's a different explanation depending on the business. We would take it obviously where your subs are your whole labor pool. There are people that, especially with overseas labor now, they're considered subcontractors, but they're like really your direct labor. Mm-hmm. But in this case, we're talking about subs where you're using temporary labor. And we'll give a big client, for example. We get that big client, right? That monster $1 million contract that's only given us 750 or only 250K a margin that I just used. But guess what? I got to deploy a sub because I don't have that resource that they need on my team. Well, that's one client. Now, there's businesses all over that are deploying these subs across the board. And what ends up happening is, hey, man, I don't know what's going on here. Things look great. We got a happy team. You know, our clients are being served, but I'm losing margin. And we'll hear in this market, especially subs are at a premium. And you forget that, hey, am I using a subcontractor to a point where they're almost an employee and now it becomes more of a benefit that you need to have them internally? Brandon, what do you say about that?
Yeah, well, it kind of depends upon how you're using them and your process for staffing. So if you're project based, then I'm seeing a lot of cases to where, because projects are so volatile, even though subs are more expensive, I need to keep my team very skeleton and use outsourced labor with subs to take care of the highs. Because what will happen is, if you hire for that, you won't let those people go. You'll hold on to them too long, and the projects aren't there, and it'll kill profitability. Versus if you're using a sub, when the project ends, you don't have more work for them, you let them go. So that flexibility, there's a little bit of premium you're going to pay for it, but most of the time I see people make up for that, on the back end, because they're not keeping the excess labor. Now, that being said, you still need to make sure that you're shopping subs. And I think a lot of times what we see is the team that, whether it's the project manager or what have you, they like to hit the easy button. Oh, yeah, we always use this sub for this. Just call them and they'll take care of it. Well, are they the best at that? And when I say the best, I mean based upon what they're delivering and what you're paying them for that. So, you got to go shop subs. Don't allow your team just to hit the easy button and put it on cruise control. Really do your work, do your homework, find out who's going to be the best and deliver the best value for what you're paying as far as that part goes. And you're exactly right, Mike, in that you need to be monitoring that, because just like everyone else, what are those subs doing? They're increasing prices. And what you paid 6 months ago, 9 months ago, 12 months ago may not be the same as what you're paying now. And the worst is whenever you just assume if that's what the sub's going to charge you, and you go ahead and sign the contract without getting the updated pricing from the sub, and now all of a sudden the margin we thought we were going to get evaporates. So definitely got to stay on top of that and manage that.
Brandon, last thing that I want to talk about, because we have a lot of people that call and are running into this. Hey, I'm in an industry. I'm sort of maxed on my price increases. I'm at the top. Problem is I have to have a certain amount of labor to do the revenue I'm at. I'm just there. And so when I look at your guys' labor efficiency concepts, mine is going lower because I can't get much more of the way in price increases. My margin is what it is. And as of right now, and the only way I can change it is through price increases. We're efficient on everything else. I've checked my subs, all that. The last thing is pricing, and I'm at the top. But my labor efficiency is lower, so I'm dropping in gross margin. It is dropping as a percentage. I'm not producing enough dollars to essentially be it the targets we've set. What should I think about doing in order to improve my margin? Because I can't get rid of this labor. I can't get rid of this labor to the margin based on my current circumstance.
So there's a couple things you got to look at there. So one is what is your value proposition, and how does that resonate in the marketplace? So if I haven't revisited what it is that I do, how I deliver it, and the value that's going to be received in a couple of years, I gotta take a step back and look at that. Now, in some cases, you're in an environment to where you're offering a discretionary service or product. And no matter what you do to the value proposition, people just aren't going to buy it like they used to, because discretionary spending is down. There's less dollars at the household income level. considering inflation and what have you that's outpaced wages. People just don't have the dollars to go and spend. It's an easy one. I'll use an example. When you look at the restaurant business, for example, if you're very high end, it's still pretty good. If you're low end, it's okay. But if you're in that messy middle, and I'll give you prices for the Southeast, and so you can adjust these based on where you are. But if you're going to dinner and it's going to be somewhere between, I would say, $15 to $17 a meal, up to 25 or so a meal, you're in that messy middle. That's it's not a fine dining experience. It's not fast or semi-fast food, and that's an easy one for folks to cut out. They go, hey, instead of going there where it's $20 a plate, we're going to go somewhere where it's 12. And when you got 5 people in your family like I do, that starts to add up. So if you're in one of those, you're in a tough spot. So the market is just not going to be receptive. And yeah, you have to have a skeleton crew to deliver. You got to have enough people to just take care of it. I've got to then kind of look at it and start to kind of go, okay, I've got to get profitable with the margin dollars that I am able to generate. And if I've already went through and kind of looked at, okay, I'm getting the most effective pricing from my vendors, I'm pushing the highest margin products that we have, I'm getting creative and maybe with different offerings that may not be as readily available in other places, I got to then go look at my overhead structure. And 9 times out of 10, the management labor one is the one that you've got to dive into to try to move to match that margin that's being produced. There's not much other wiggle room in some of those other kind of categories. And so that's usually the next step that you start to dive into and look at there.
Awesome. Well, hey, I know we beat margin to death today, but as you can see, there's a lot that goes into it that people don't think about. And so if you're listening, if you feel like you're getting the squeeze somewhere, check those margin areas first. How else can you look at it besides my overall margin that could be biting you, especially there's still inflation out there. There's still price increases from people. There's tariffs. There's all these things going on. Is your margin getting eaten up in one of these areas, and have a look at it? Because if you come to us, the very first thing we're going to do is check that margin. So, Brendan, anything to close?
I think that wraps it up. I appreciate everybody tuning in and listening. The podcast is growing, which is great. We get a lot of folks that call our office that are interested in working together, and they say, "Hey, I've heard you guys on the podcast." We'll hop on a call with them. They're like, "Hey, I feel like I know you. I've heard you on the podcast." So share it. We want to continue to spread the good news. If you know of a colleague or a friend or someone who may like this, email them about it. Let them know about it. Shoot them a text with a link to the podcast in there. We want to continue to grow it and see how big we can get it.
Yeah, and the little teaser, in 2 days, we will be recording an episode with Zach Oliva of Oliva Gibbs. This is going to be another good one. Yeah, this is another good one, another big-time entrepreneur with a big-time company to learn from.
You want to talk about somebody who has taken a company and, poured rocket fuel into it? Zach's your guy. And what I've been really impressed with is not only their ability to grow, but the culture that they have as they've been able to achieve the growth. They've been able to have really great profitability along the way as well with that. So they haven't sacrificed things in order to achieve that. Mm-hmm. And, I think you guys are going to be pleased and impressed with what Zach has been able to do. He and his team. I know he didn't do it alone, but what they've been able to do, and some really cool lessons along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, all right, everyone. We'll see you in a couple of days. And like I said, share the podcast. And thanks for listening.
See y'all.
If you want to know more about driving sustainable profitability for your business, or are interested in learning more about CRI Simple Numbers, please visit our website at simplenumberscri.com. Thanks for listening to this episode of Profitability Playbook, the Simple Numbers Podcast. You can subscribe to Profitability Playbook on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. If you like what you heard today, please leave us a review. This podcast is brought to you by CRI Simple Numbers, LLC, a division of CRI Capital Group, LLC, and a subsidiary of CRI Advisors, LLC. CRI is the trusted brand under which Carr, Riggs & Ingram, LLC, the CPA firm, and CRI Advisors, LLC, along with its subsidiaries, deliver professional services. Please note, Carr, Riggs & Ingram, LLC is a licensed independent CPA firm offering attest services, whereas CRI Advisors, LLC and its subsidiaries specialize in providing tax and business consulting services. These entities operate within an alternative practice structure as defined by the AICPA Code of Professional Conduct and comply fully with applicable laws, regulations, and professional standards. Ready to simplify your business finances and drive growth? Explore valuable resources, books, and tools designed for entrepreneurs and small businesses at simplenumberscri.com.